I was sitting at my computer one night, and I got an email from a source who said, hey, Tony, you better look at these documents. And he explained that a nonprofit had used the Freedom of Information Act to get a bunch of spending records for the Richland and Kershaw County solicitor. And then they had created this website and just threw all these documents for everybody to look at that nobody had. So I went onto the website, and there was something like 1,000 pages. It was just, credit card receipts and credit card statements. It was this big mash of stuff, and there's really nothing you can do except for dig in. So I did, and a bunch of us did. We started looking at these documents, and we began to see things like, what's this, charge for a trip to Ecuador on the taxpayer's dime? And what's this trip to the Minnesota Twins game on the taxpayer's dime? And oh yeah, he was behind home plate. And then, why is his assistant going to Kentucky to get dental work on the taxpayer's dime? So my favorite one was, there was this Uber receipt for $179. And the cool thing about an Uber receipt is that it shows the route you took. And I'm from Minneapolis, Minnesota originally. So, Minneapolis, it's the Vikings, right? And the Twins and Prince at the time. Yeah. And lo and behold, Dan Johnson took a $179 trip to see Prince's house on your dime. So long story short, we did a story, and he ended up in federal prison. The second link in the chain came in the wake of that. We thought, what other officials were doing similar things? And we thought about sheriffs, and we started blanketing the state with FOIA requests to every single sheriff in South Carolina, all 46 counties, and lo and behold, we found the same kinds of things. There was a sheriff up in Chester County who was getting $100 a night room upgrades, and when I asked him about it, he said, well, I'm a big guy, and my feet dangle off the mattress. So, long story short, he's awaiting federal sentencing right now. We did another sheriff, too, in Colleton County. He was doing similar things. So that was the third link of the chain came in the wake of that, and we had gotten some information about natural gas authorities who were flying down zip lines and spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to go to conferences. And we thought, we're seeing all this stuff happen in rural parts of our state. And then the light bulb kind of went off, and we realized, that's the same place where the newspapers are closing or shrinking, and there's no scrutiny. So we decided, let's team up with these local papers. Let's, start digging into things that haven't been looked at, work with these papers instead of compete with them, and then turn the journalistic dimmer up a little bit and, see what we see.
So that's a key part of what we're talking about there is in the past, and we were talking about this a little bit last night we were in Columbia, is that I think newspapers historically Avery said, have been out to kill each other. You're just out there competing and trying to fight for the same stories and make each other look bad and one up the other guy. And this was something different. And a key part of that was just the importance of local newspapers to those communities. And I was hoping, Jen, you could talk a little bit about, why was that such an important component of Uncovered? If you can explain the concept of news deserts and what's been going on in the state in these rural areas where a lot of this corruption is occurring.
So it's probably not a surprise to any of you that newspapers have faced tremendous financial pressures recently, right? So it might surprise you, though, to know that in the past 15, 20 years, that half of print journalists have lost their jobs. Okay, so that's half the number of people who were going to the school board meeting, going to the county council meeting, who are digging through the kind of documents Tony just talked about. So what has been lost when you lose all those journalistic jobs? In South Carolina in 2020, we lost 10 newspapers just in that 1 year alone, and this is obviously not a huge state. Again, what has been lost? When you look at those closures, and going back a few years before that, you'll see there are communities that once had several newspapers that now only have one, And in fact, now we're down to a county that has none. So Allendale County has no newspaper operating in it today. I think it was 2014, 2015 they closed, and so in the years following that, they've not had anybody going to county council meetings, board meetings, all those things we just talked about. And that's what we call a news desert, is a place that doesn't have a newspaper anymore, serving that watchdog role. And one of the stories Stephen and I wrote together looked at dying newspapers, essentially, or small town newspapers that were really struggling. We looked at one community called up in Union County where they had, in 2020, when one of their papers closed, it left one remaining, and it's a two-man shop. They do everything. Those same two people deliver the paper, they write the stories and take the pictures, they do everything to serve that county. That is a service that you have to imagine Union without, because there is a strong likelihood that when those two people retire, there will not be a newspaper at all in Union County. So what's missing then? What's lost? So the other community we looked at was Ware Shoals, which had just lost its local newspaper. And we started thinking about it as like a glue. Think of a newspaper as a watchdog. Yes, that's obviously a really vital role and one that we focused on in this project, in a cupboard. But also it serves as, like I said, this glue. It's something that tells you about your neighbor who won an award, or the football game and who was the hero of the football game. It tells you if somebody you knew in high school has passed away. One man who Stephen spoke with, one of his friends had died, and he didn't learn about it until after the funeral because he didn't have a way of finding out. And he felt terrible that he hadn't been there to support the man's family and obviously to show his condolences. So if you think of a newspaper as a watchdog, yes, but also think about what that brings to a community. And beyond even, you can think of the press in terms of all the sort of the national political coverage and the discourse surrounding that. But these are local community newspapers that serve a much different purpose. They actually bring people together around common events and news and understanding. So I think we wanted to explore the watchdog role, which we'll talk about a little bit more obviously tonight, but also the function that newspapers serve as far as keeping communities intact.
So against that backdrop, Stephen, tell us a little bit how the uncovered model works. It's a little bit of a different thing that hadn't ever been tried in this state before, and you talk a bit about how it functions and also some of the challenges, I guess, just even coming out of the gate with this that we saw.
Yeah, well, Tony and Glenn kind of mentioned it a little bit, but we have this idea, it sounds great, but then the whole goal was to have a partnership, to try to partner with people, and if we don't have partners, it doesn't really work. So one of the things that we had to do was kind of approach different editors from places, different publishers, and try to sell them on this idea of working together. I think one of the selling points that we felt like we had was that we could produce stories and share them with them that they could publish. We weren't necessarily asking them to devote a lot of resources if they didn't have the ability to do it, because some of these places are, like Jen was talking about, 1 or 2 people working there, or they just don't have the time to take on some of these story ideas. So part of it was just trying to work with them. But then what we found out as we added more partners was there were real opportunities for us to work together on ideas. Editors might share stories with us and a couple of story ideas that the editor just said, I don't have the ability to work on this, but I'm happy to help. Or, Tony or others did a story kind of initially, and then they follow up with their own reporting based on the response to that story or other things. And so it really developed into this opportunity where it really was a kind of a teamwork effort, but one where we were working together on some story, they were taking the lead, we would take the lead. And so it really, I guess, evolved from beyond what we initially were expecting or knew that it would be. And I think ultimately that's really good because it has some sustaining effort to continue beyond. There was a trial for one of the sheriffs that Tony was talking about. And I remember we already had this kind of network in place that we could share coverage and share reporting, and that allowed us to kind of work together in a way that we wouldn't have normally. So I think what's exciting about this is, 1, 2, years down the line, even if it's not an uncovered story, there might be opportunities for us to work together and to do stories with different newspapers that we never would have before. And I think there's more opportunities to team up with more newspapers as well to expand that network.
Yeah, and that's the cool thing is that relationship didn't exist before. And like you said, we were cold calling people around the state. Some of them we knew, some of them we didn't. And you call up and say, hey, we got this great idea, like Avery said, like, we got this great idea, you can't really tell anybody about it yet, but we want you to do this. And they're like, well, how much is this gonna cost? And we're like, well, it's not gonna cost you anything. And they're, okay. And then, well, how many people do I have to devote to it? Well, not necessarily. If you wanna come and you wanna work on it with us, you can, but you don't have to. We can do the story, and maybe you give us the photos from your library, or maybe go out and take some things, give us the benefit of your institutional knowledge. And at first, I think people were not entirely sure because of that prior competition. Basically, the whole message was we want to have collaboration rather than competition in this instance. And I think as we started to roll out more stories, they got it, and we're really excited about it. Like I said, more people are jumping on. Since the cat got out of the bag last night, maybe we could talk a little bit about this next step that we haven't really formally announced yet, but that we're working on.
Yeah, so we've been thinking really hard about what can we do for these smaller papers. And we came up with this idea called the Oasis Project. And its goal is to kind of look in depth from an academic standpoint what the needs are of these smaller community newspapers. What are their challenges? And with the hope of finding some solutions. And we're doing it with Presbyterian College. They're going to pick 4 students to work on this for the entire summer. It's kind of a scholarship program for them. And the hope is that, there are some efforts in other parts of the country that help these smaller papers when their owners are kind of getting up in years and are about to retire. And so often, like farming and other industries, if they retire, that's it. So if we can create some sort of sustainability program out of this, I think that would be very exciting.
Okay, like I said, we have some more things we could talk about, but I'd be totally excited to find out if anybody had any initial questions or thoughts or things they'd like to bring up.
Hi, my name is Scott Weldon, and I have one question to start off with. A couple of years back, I saw that the city of Charleston spent about $1 million to encrypt the police radio system. And although I feel it's sort of an obstruction of transparency, they claimed it was bad actors were listening to the radio and getting a jump on them. Can you speak to that at all? And how it's affected your job to research?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that, I think. So, yeah, it used to be, if you were a police reporter, which I was for a lot of years, I call myself sort of a semi-reformed crime reporter, because I did that for a lot of years, love crime reporting. But, I mean, you'd listen to the scanner, and that's how you found out when things were going bad around the city. And now you're kind of left in this position of, like, looking at Twitter, or depending on a phone call, or seeing something, because not just the city of Charleston, but pretty much most of your major agencies around here have gone to encrypted digital radio transmissions, and that's a whole thing around the country too. That's been a move over the past probably decade. And you can see from the police end of things that you don't have people listening in. You can operate a little more with stealth and accomplish what you're set out to do. On the other hand, it keeps people from knowing what's going on in their community too. The same as when they hide police reports and they don't share those with you. So we're actually talking right now about doing a little bit more about that. I think we found some workarounds in the law, and I think under the FOIA law, I'm not sure. I think they have to share, because it's paid for with taxpayer dollars, I think they have to share the frequencies with us. So stay tuned on that.
Thank you.
One thing I would add on that is that the other problem is that if you don't know there's breaking news going on somewhere, you can't go to it, right? Because you don't know it's happening. So that impedes photography, us getting photos from the site. It also means then you're relying on press releases from the agency that has its own reasons for putting whatever in a press release. And we don't want to be in a situation where our coverage of the police is based on their own press release. So to me, that's a really important question because it goes to the transparency we were talking about. If we're dependent only on the sheriff's office, for instance, to send us a press release about what happened, that's not transparent, right? So it's a big issue we've all been discussing recently, but it's, to me, I understand what you're saying as far as you don't want to alert whoever you're going to arrest, for instance, that you're coming. But on the other hand, I don't think that we should be beholden to their party line as far as what they want us to know.
Yes, but particularly in a town that really tourism drives everything, right? So bad news reflects poorly on tourism and hurts those efforts, so it's an economic development thing too. And there's all these factors in play, and hiding that stuff keeps the public in the dark.
I just wanted to add one very quick thing. So before I got here, I was in Parkland, Florida, covering the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas high school shooting where 17 children were killed. And one of the things that happened was Wait, you can't hear me?
Might be just me.
Is that better? Can you hear me better? Oh, okay. Okay. So just I was covering the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas high school shooting in Parkland, Florida before I got here. And one of the things that happened was the shooter had killed 17 children at this high school, but he fled before the police and authorities were able to find him. And was later arrested. And the reason that we heard his name and found out when he was arrested was because that was over the police scanner. And so many months later, as we dug into this event and tried to find out kind of what happened with the police response, we were able to use the time code from that police scanner to figure out, when was he arrested, what was happening, what were police saying at that certain time. And so one of the reasons we were able to kind of eventually break down what happened and really expose a lot of issues was because of that audio. So that is kind of, it's not just even in real time, it's the ability to come back once that event happens and to look at something in depth. So there's real value to it.
First of all, I'd like to thank you for what you're doing. I think it's really great to expose this stuff. It's the only way to get rid of it is to shine a light on it. My question is, in some of the articles that I've read, you see reference to the Freedom of Information Act and the cost to get your hands on the material. Can you talk a little bit about, is that cost fair or is it excessive, and how did that cost come about, or just anything that would be of interest to us in terms of that whole idea of paying for this stuff?
Start.
So I once submitted a FOIA to the Medical University of South Carolina, and they told me that it would cost $275,000 to fulfill that. $275,000 for basically an email search. So yeah, we get some ridiculous bills from agencies across the state, and it's increasingly becoming a tool by agencies to not give us information. They know that if they send a $3,000 bill, that we may not pursue it, or that we may narrow it so much that we'll miss what they're trying to hide. So the Freedom of Information, the FOIA Act is a problematic law that needs to be strengthened for all of you, as much as anybody.
Yeah, a few years back, they changed the FOIA to add deadlines to it, so that before it was kind of open-ended, even though most governments gave you the stuff within a couple weeks, or within a month's time. So they put these deadlines in, but then they also snuck in this language that said you could charge for retrieving and reviewing and redacting documents. And it's supposed to be done by the employee who's the lowest paid employee capable of doing the task. So what a lot of agencies will do is they will say the only person really capable of doing it is our in-house lawyer who makes like 50, 60 bucks an hour. So that jacks the price up astronomically, and so then you're in this negotiating pattern. And since we started this investigative fund, the fund has actually allowed us to say, okay, you want to charge us this much, we're not going to pay $275,000, but it allows us to sort of come back and say, all right, we will pay that. And we have been paying some of the FOIA costs for our partner papers too. We had a paper talking last night, Barbara Ball up in Blythewood, who had been trying to get superintendent spending records. All these sort of suspicions that there was a slush fund there, that they were spending all sorts of money on trips and travel that really probably shouldn't with the taxpayer dollars. But they said to get those records, it's going to cost $235. Barbara doesn't have $235. It's a small newspaper. She pays the rent at the paper sometimes, doesn't take a salary. She does it because she loves it. And she's been awarded like the Assertive Journalist Award in the state 3 times because she's just a bulldog who goes after the information. But she couldn't, she was stuck in her tracks and turned to us. We came in, offered to pay for that. And it was funny because suddenly when we asked for it, they gave it to us for free. They just didn't like her asking those questions. So people play games with the FOIA all the time. And this is Sunshine Week. That's why we're doing that this week. And it's really celebrating the FOIA and also calling attention to big gaping holes in it that need to be fixed.
You know, one thing I'd add to that is that that's not just charges, those aren't just charges to us. Those are charges to all you, right? The FOIA law is not just for newspapers, it's for anybody who wants information about their public entities and how their money's spent and other kinds of records. So it's not something that just targets the newspaper. All of you have the right to that information as well. And maybe you don't have $275,000 or whatever sitting around to get that information. I mean, that's what I always encourage people. Make sure that your voices are heard when it's time to tackle FOIA reform, because it's really for you as taxpayers, right?
Do you have any hopes that it will become more fair or become more standard, or is there something to?
We always have the hope. I think it's, what happens with the legislature a lot of time is each session they kind of have an issue, right, that they tackle. And they, whether it's education reform or infrastructure or whatever. And so they tackled the Freedom of Information Act a few years ago and they made these changes. It's hard to get their interest into taking it back up again because they move on. So yeah, we just have to just keep pushing.
I think we're laying the groundwork.
One question I have is that I'm wondering to what extent your investigative reporting is honing in on institutionalized corruption and wrong in South Carolina. I'm particularly concerned with utilities, water, electricity, the kinds of things that everyone needs that we find are sometimes undermined by various interests that are making huge amounts of money on the robbing of these huge agglomerates of money. And I think I'm wondering sometimes whether your reporting has been coming in on the small fry and not going high enough to take on these institutional questions. I'm particularly interested in water here in Charleston, South Carolina. My water was cut off this morning. I paid a bill less than a month ago. My contention is that if someone has paid a bill less than a month ago, there must be some other way you can deal with the problem besides turning off the water and then charging them an extortionate fee for turning it back on. That's turning it off and on when it should have been done in the first place. So the operation of these, I know how I've investigated it myself and found out that my problem results from a commingling of accounts that the water authority or water system did in my particular case. But it seems as though I'm being extorted. And I'm wondering why, if it's happening to other people, then you need to look at that. So systemic issues regarding corruption in South Carolina, I think it's important to attack. With regard to your, the question of reporters and the loss of scrutiny that comes from having a short supply of reporters, I think is something we need to look into setting up foundations that support journalism. I think, and going to the not-for-profit model. The for-profit model in journalism has shown you that it will decrease the amount of revenue available for good journalism when you don't, if they can find other means of making a dollar.
Oh, yeah, that's pretty clear.
Yeah, so, or if it becomes too expensive. So I think we need to look at reorganization of journalism in that case as well. And I wonder to what extent you're looking at examples of that around the country and how it could be applied in South Carolina.
I think I actually agree with almost everything you said. So, first of all, the sort of systemic look, I think all of us, when we're doing a story, we look for that little door to go through, which helps, hopefully, is a door to a larger issue, and maybe represents a larger systemic issue. So you look for that one thing you can kind of get a handle on. I think as far as, your other points about what we can do as an industry, so we've got, different models that are competing now. You've got the for-profit model with these hedge funds that are cutting staff, and they're not creating a sustainable path for themselves, I don't think. We have a little different model here in Charleston, with it's privately owned, but I could totally see our paper going nonprofit down the road.
And the investigative fund has allowed us to operate a little bit more in that realm, right, where you're taking donations essentially that help you fund things like paying FOIA bills. And that is a step in that direction potentially. I think that the question though is if you are looking at a county like Allendale County, which has no newspaper in it, how are you going to establish a feasible operation there? It's not going to be a for-profit model. That seems to be fairly obvious, right? But maybe there is an opportunity for some kind of nonprofit to form and go into some of them, particularly the rural communities in South Carolina that don't have, they just don't have the base of people to fund, or even just businesses to fund the newspaper. But I'll say one risk in a place like Allendale County, where they've had no newspaper, is that then they have this tremendous financial disarray occur. In the time period when there was no journalists operating there for the most part, they were doing things like not even having a general ledger. They had the sheriff taking out money without any explanation as to why. The clerk giving bonuses to herself and her employees without reporting them. All kinds of things. It was just a mess. Part of that's because nobody was asking questions. So from the community's perspective, all that costs money, and it opens the door to potential wrongdoing. So it's not only the loss of the newspaper, but it winds up costing the taxpayers more. And research shows that. So if you could find a nonprofit model that could go into a place like Allendale and operate a newspaper, I think would be hugely beneficial, but right now that doesn't exist. I'm not aware of any, maybe you guys know, but I'm not aware of any kind of nonprofit entity that is doing that kind of work, particularly in rural South Carolina.
Perhaps the Oasis Project could come up with that, some ideas.
First installment of Uncover, where he looked at utilities. They're just spending your money like water, going on trips, sucking down good wine, staying at 5-star resorts, just having a grand old time, right? And part of the reason they were doing that is because they didn't have to report that activity to the state ethics commission. And after we wrote about that, the governor proposed tightening that loophole and requiring more stringent reporting requirements. And even before that, some of the utilities, I guess that we call them out, they changed their own internal policies to prevent that. And there was one waste authority up in Greenville that was planning on going up to the Grove Park Inn around Asheville. Really nice place to stay. I've not stayed there, but it's a really nice place to stay. Yeah, right. Well, good for you. And but yeah, so they were going to go up there, and we wrote about it, and I think Anna Mitchell broke down. I forget what the exact cost was, but it was some crazy figure for about 8 hours of work they were gonna spend, like $14,000 or something to put people up. And when we wrote about that, they suddenly said, maybe we'll just stay in Greenville and do it here. So it has an effect, but yeah, it's the systemic things are what we're aiming for sure.
Yeah, well, as I said, I hope it encompasses utilities.
Yeah, yeah.
In much the same vein as reporting on the Base Review Act and that kind of
Sure.
thing that has led to massive loss of public resources.
Sir, I have to tell you, my grandfather owned the only ice house in most of
We
Pennsylvania.
can't hear.
Oh, you might have to turn that in. Is it on?
I think you have to stand up.
Oh, I can't.
No, it's on, it's just not working, let me.
Boom it
Go
out.
ahead and if you could just stand up with your question really
Uh,
loud. so the
Sir, I want to tell you, my grandfather owned the only ice house in most of Pennsylvania. And when he died, we discovered he never paid a water bill. That's all I'm saying about that. So maybe you know what's going on with water.
He gotta pay the water bill, but he paid someone.
That's a lot of ice.
I came here tonight because I may have misunderstood what this was all about, but I have been reading what you're doing. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I have been reading what you've been doing and following it and so excited. I'm newer here, only 3 years, from Pennsylvania, and I used to work for a senator, so I was used to picking up the phone and saying, hey, this is Jackie Ravenstein from Senator Porterfield's office, and whatever it was done, like it got done. And now I'm down here and I'm just Jackie Ravenstein. I bought a new Lennar house. I built a Lennar house, and I live in Carolina Park. And never had a new house. I own a business in Pennsylvania where I restore old homes. So I'm all about doing the right thing. Lennar is building crap, and I'm very mad because I have no options. There is nothing out there watching out for a homeowner. And the reason I'm here, and I've written to a couple of the reporters, because the area of homes that we have, there are 200 new homes, and they have an average of 50 violations, code violations, per home. That is over 10,000 code violations in 200 houses. And I was hoping the engineer was here. He was trying to get here, so if you had some specific questions for him. But we have no help. There's nothing we can do. We go to Lennar, they delay, they lie, whatever it is. I've never seen this in my life. And so then we thought we'd go to the town. So I went to the town, and they sent John Wood out, and he came and he said, not only do you have 64 code violations, you have 69 code violations. So he documented it. They were to, do citations, go to court. All of a sudden, Mr. Lee Cave quit. I don't know who he is, but he quit from the town of Mount Pleasant. We have a new building official. His name is William Horn, and he just sent me a nasty email telling me that after a house has received a certificate of occupancy, a CO, the town cannot get involved. Well, a CO is issued before you buy your house. So the town is officially not helping anybody in Mount Pleasant if you have a code violation. And I came because I thought you were asking us to come if we had an issue, and I'm representing a whole lot of people.
Yeah, well, we'd be happy to talk to you about it if you want to stick around afterwards.
Thank you, and I'm sorry if I came and had the wrong assumption.
No, we're all about
I apologize.
getting tips too. I mean, anyone has tips, happy to hear them. So,
What part of Carolina Park are you in?
The new phase on Maidstone.
yeah, stick around after.
I'd be glad to.
Okay. All right.
Just wanted to say something. There are like different levels of what you guys do. There's the local level, which is critical. That's what we need. And then there's the bigger papers that carry more national things. But really, never, I think, in my lifetime, has it been more important that we have the fourth estate that is really finding out and digging into the problems. I've been really proud. I used to deliver this newspaper
Oh.
right, as a kid.
So I'm very proud of y'all, and I have supported y'all. I have sent you money, and everybody ought to put their money where their mouth is, okay? That's all I'm saying, okay?
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I started out as a paper boy too.
All right, well, that's a great way to start. Thank you.
We'll get you.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. My name is Mare. I have a question and a comment. My question is, I believe it's Mr. Hobbs and Mr. Smith who did that really excellent reporting on the corruption and incompetence in the magistrate courts. Yeah. Was that not
Joey.
Is that Joey?
Joey Crane.
Oh, yeah, Joe Crane.
Joe
yeah.
Crane, unfortunately.
Oh, okay.
But we've done some, yeah. We've
Yes.
all.
Are you continuing to report on that?
Yeah, we still have a tip line up with ProPublica, which worked with us on that. That's a, for those not familiar, it's a nonprofit journalism, investigative journalism center, and they partnered with us on that project, and I still get tips on that, yeah, for sure.
This is actually leading into my comment. I actually found myself quite unwittingly involved in our local magistrate court in Beaufort County, and which is mired in the same corruption and incompetence that you reported on in, I think it was Charleston County and some of the other areas. And we actually successfully sued Beaufort County for conspiracy and abusive process with that court as an unindicted co-conspirator, and we won. The county ended up settling with us. And in the process of that, I had to do some FOIAs before we got discovery in the case and so forth. And I wanted to talk about FOIA because currently we have two cases. One is going to be heard by the Supreme Court. It's about officials using their private emails, which you know they do, to avoid transparency. And it's like a shadow government. And I know that happens in Charleston, it happens in every county. And so we are looking for a definitive ruling, even though FOIA doesn't allow it, they do it anyway. But we're looking for something definitive by the Supreme Court to send a message, number one, about doing it. And we want to see these emails, and they are working so hard in Beaufort County to keep us from seeing them that you know that there are things in there that they don't want us to see. We have a pretty good idea what it is, but we want to see them. And then we're going to release them to the general public. The other one is a FOIA case against your local Charleston CBB, because we just asked for 1 year of accounting for 2017, because they have a contract where they said they would be responsive to FOIA, and now they said they don't have anything. So that's a case that's in your court here right now. But I wanted to say about FOIA is that you have to be extremely tenacious, you have to have money, because you have to use your money while they're using your money to fight you, as you know.
It's a really good way to put it, yeah.
And one of the things that they do, and you raised the issue, is first they'll do cost. They'll come up with some crazy number that they just pull out of thin air. And once you argue about cost, they'll come up with something else, another pretext, like in our case against Beaufort County, all of a sudden all the emails were privileged. So somehow using your personal email to conduct business somehow was covered by attorney-client privilege. So the issue is that FOIA can be a toothless tiger unless you are willing to go all the way and really fight it, because the legislature is always going to give themselves an out. Like you mentioned, they have an out where they'll say we can redact or retract or whatever. And they also have an out they put in the last version, which is they can sue you for harassing them. So it's really the legislature that we really have to blame for weak ethics laws and weak FOIA laws, because the last thing they want those two laws to do is boomerang back on them. So that was the piece I wanted to mention that I think is missing, is that it's our legislature that's very self-protective, and there are many lawyers in our legislature. So they write the laws really that benefit themselves.
But if you want to talk about using personal and private and public emails, the legislature is a totally different beast, because they've exempted themselves from having to share any emails. Yeah.
That's why you gotta vote. Be careful who you vote for.
I know.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
we, the members of the public, are a little discouraged by seeing 4 members from the big boys talking about the frustrations with things like FOIA. So what I'm asking is, considering who and where you are, why isn't, or is there any initiative on the part of the newspaper to make stars of these people? You know, have them, that $275,000 BS for a FOIA request, put them on blast. You know, create a Hall of Fame of legislative abuse. Name the head of the organization whose employees is doing this stuff. Because we can't make the noise that you guys can make. And if we start making noise, as long as you behave, you know, I have people tell me, well, behave now. Have you ever seen anybody behave and having any fun? So what I'm saying is, you've got the mechanism. Let's use it so that when you benefit, we benefit. Because when they ask me for $275, I'm going to go file a something on them that says that they're trying to kill me. So what I'm saying is, if we put them on the front page, if we highlight the abuses, then maybe some of that stuff, I don't know about anybody else, but we've got corruption up to here. And that's from the national level. And when you get to the local level, and all of this stuff affects us. There's nobody in this country that is isolated from the garbage that we have to put up with on a regular basis. So those of us who are interested, who know that we're impacted, who have some tools, I say, you got a whole community rooting for you. Let's have at it.
Well, we have on a regular basis put people out there with violating the law. I thought of a story a few years back. The Charleston police started hiding crime details on supplemental reports, even though the legislature had passed changes to the FOIA, making sure that those materials should be available to us. They said, you can't have those. And we're not trying to hide stuff, we're just protecting elements of the crime, yada, yada. And they said that there's no sort of concerted plan to do this.
Yeah, so criminal law and information is public information.
So we spent months trying to work with them on this, didn't get anywhere. So I wrote a story, basically talking about all these crimes that nobody in the community had heard of, and how it was putting people at risk, and it did not make the police department look good. And then the day after that, somebody from the police department leaked me an internal memo that said, hide all this information in these reports because we don't want the public and the media to see it. So it was the exact thing that they told us that we don't have a formal policy on, that they did it.
Right.
We're basically a sanitation crew. If, we just got to keep on cleaning the stuff up.
Yeah.
If we stop, then bad things happen.
First, I would like to say thank you, and I'm sure that I can speak on behalf of everyone in this room by saying thank you for the work you all do. I know that, I personally know that a lot of hours go into it, a lot of effort. It's often a thankless job, so sincere thank you for what you do. As far as the investigations that you are currently working on, do you all, I know that you would lose the element of surprise by doing this. I also know that you may be stonewalled by officials and others by doing this, but do you ever announce either in print or on the website what you're currently working on so that citizens may have the opportunity to contribute with any information that they may have on the subject matter?
So that's kind of an interesting concept, kind of crowdsourcing, a story, letting it out and then asking people to participate. We've done that in the past. I think a better approach is to put out a story and then just keep putting out the same story, or not the same story, but follow-up stories, creating that, what we call rolling thunder in the newsroom, that constant bit of pressure. And that's what generates the tips that generate other tips, that generate stories, that generates change.
Yeah, I think getting ahead of it sometimes, you might not have the information to really put it out there at that point. And then there is still some competitive pressure as well. And you don't want the government getting too far ahead of the story on you too before you have a chance to get it out. But yeah, we have done that in the past and we will continue to do that when applicable.
Hey, I'm Woody Norris. I'm a local business owner of Booze Pops. I never planned on getting into politics, but here I am. And I just wanted to commend you guys. We need to turn this into an army. We need this across the entire state, shining the light on all the back door. We need our legislators to wear jackets, NASCAR jackets, to say who their sponsors are.
That's a great idea. I like that.
We appreciate it. Everybody appreciates this, and I started reading on you guys, and I fell in love immediately. I was like, wow, we need this.
Well, thank you for it.
We have one more time for one more question up here. I just want to make sure we're careful of everybody's time, but I believe you guys will be available afterwards to answer questions.
Yeah, we'll do
Right here.
I want to thank you too for everything that you do. And I do reach out to my friends and I ask them to donate to this. I donate to this Uncovered. I just can't tell you how good I think it is. And when I ask my friends to donate, I say that one of the revelations that you had was about this real poor county in the state. I think it was maybe a little bit north of Columbia and to the west. But it was one of the it was a special district. And I think it was for natural gas. And so it was a special service district or something like that. And one of the things that was reported in this story, it was one of the very first ones I remember, the head of this service district had a salary of $550,000. And this was like, in a way, just like the little Mickey Mouse committee. And when I read that, that really made me realize how important newspaper reporting is. So I do have a question. Did this man, I hope he had to pay back all that big salary. Do you recall whatever happened to him?
Yeah, so yeah, he ran a natural gas authority utility up in the upstate. And not only did he make $500,000, he also had his PEEP staff go to hotels for $30,000 for a couple of days, and they were living high on the hog. And yeah, so a couple of interesting things about that is, no, he kept that money, and I think he is retiring, but with a lot of money. And then the second thing is that natural gas authority, one of the things, when I sent the FOIA to them, asking for all their records, they said nobody had ever done that before, which speaks to the whole issue right there.
What, ask for the records or kept records?
Ask for the records. Use the FOIA to ask for basic financials. First time ever.
Local people on the local issues, they don't vote for the local people. And that's where everything that happens in your life happens.
That's right.
And people don't care.
Introduce Robbie Scott here.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Robbie Scott. I am the I'm not going to use this microphone, I'm going to use my teacher voice. I'm Robbie Scott. I'm the Director of Development for the Post and Courier's Public Service and Investigative Reporting Fund. I want to personally thank you all for coming out this evening for this extraordinarily engaging conversation that we've had tonight. Thank you. Tonight's event, the panel discussion, was presented in conjunction with Sunshine Week. It's an initiative to promote access to information and open government. It's celebrated nationally March 13th through 19th. The Post and Courier recognizes that the people of South Carolina deserve and have a legal right to public information and open government 365 days a year. Like many other freedoms, freedom of information and freedom of the press is not free. That is why we established the Post and Courier's Public Service and Investigative Reporting Fund. The deep dive reporting and collaborative journalism you've heard about this evening is happening because of the support of our donors. And there's a lot of you in the room tonight, and we want to say thank you to the gentleman who was brave enough to stand up and say, I give, and ma'am in front of him, encouraging your friends to. Thank you. We appreciate that. That's how we're going to be able to sustain what we do. And I heard someone say, you need to be doing this all over South Carolina. We are. We have the Post and Courier Myrtle Beach, the Post and Courier Columbia, the Post and Courier Greenville, the Post and Courier Spartanburg, and soon to open the Post and Courier Hilton Head. And ma'am, I have often said that I am the Post and Courier's head cheerleader, but I think you are. And we want you to know we appreciate your comments too. Simply put, newspapers can no longer rely on advertising dollars and circulation to stay alive. We're depending on you. We take our role as public watchdogs very, very seriously. We're really happy that you came out tonight, and we have an understanding that we have a responsibility to you, to be your eyes and ears, and that's something that we cherish. Government functions best when it happens in the open. And that's what we intend to make sure happens. Thank you.
Sunshine Week began in 2005. A group of editors got together and felt that there was an opportunity for us to once a year inform the public about open government, open meetings, open records, the things that journalists fight for every day.
It is important to have an open government, to have access, transparency, because you want to know how your government is making decisions and spending your money.
Sunshine Week is a time to remember the Freedom of Information Act, designed to protect citizens, to make sure they have access to the public's business, primarily documents and other records.
Those are your records. They're produced by your people, your elected officials. If there's something going on, those are documents that we want to share with you, and that's what makes that important.
If we didn't have FOIA, I would think we would just be in the dark, right? We would just have to take government officials' word for what they say they're doing.
The FOIA gives you access to police reports for the past 14 days. It allows you to look at employee personnel files. It allows you to look at meeting minutes. It grants you access to public meetings. It's an important transparency tool.
For us as journalists, it's a way for us to find stories and things to look into.
It's the main tool we have to ensure that public officials are held accountable to what we're paying them to do.
Corruption thrives behind closed doors, so without access to
public information, there's typically a breakdown in the way that government is supposed to work.
Well, imagine what would happen if you leave people with no supervision and a lot of money.
They are using our tax dollars as their personal ATMs. That's not okay.
All of our stories are based on sourcing in one way or another. Frequently we speak to people or we attend meetings, but documents play a huge part in what we do, and in particular, documents that record what our governments are doing, what our public officials are doing.
They help round out a story. If there's a story that seems incomplete, FOIAs can be used to fill in that gap.
In order to access public documents, all you have to do is contact local city officials or county officials and ask for them, essentially. They are obligated under law to provide that to the public.
You could honestly get access to more than you think as an average citizen. It doesn't take any special certification to do it. It's your right as a South Carolinian to be able to access these documents.
It's really empowering, I think, for anyone in the public to be able to go to your government officials and ask for records.
The Freedom of Information Act, it's not just a tool for newspapers, it's a tool for everybody.
You know, most people don't realize how easy it is to file a FOIA request.
If you go to our website, postandcourier.com/uncovered, you will see on the right-hand rail something we call a Citizens Toolkit. Click on that and you will find some examples of how to write your own Freedom of Information Act request.